Today, we are going to unpack a single translation error from about 1600 years ago. And it's a pretty big deal because this one little mistake has quietly shaped how millions of believers experience sin, guilt, and even salvation. So what if that constant struggle so many of us feel isn't quite what we think it is? I mean, have you ever felt that weight? That persistent feeling that no matter how hard you try, you're just always falling short? It's that nagging thought in the back of your mind that true peace is just out of reach. It is a heavy, heavy burden, and as it turns out, it has a very long history. But what if, and just hang with me here, what if a huge part of that struggle isn't some personal failing on your part, but actually comes from a massive translation mistake? One that happened over a millennium and a half ago and has shaped how we understand our very nature ever since. So that gets us to the real heart of the question for this explainer. When Adam sinned, what did we, his descendants, actually inherit? Was it a soul that is just inherently sinful right from birth, what some call a sin nature? Or did we inherit a mortal soul, a body and a mind that are subject to death? Because believe me, the difference between those two is everything. Now, the most common view, the one a lot of us probably grew up with, is often called the infused sin view. The basic idea is that Adam's sin was, kind of poured into the entire human race. It's the teaching that we are all born with corrupted, sinful souls from the get-go. And this idea has been the bedrock of a lot of theology for centuries. What's so wild is that this entire theological framework really hinges on how we read one single verse in the Bible, a verse that, it seems, has been deeply misunderstood for a very, very long time. Okay, so this is Romans 5:12, probably how many of us have read it. It says that death spread to all men because all sinned. Now, this sounds pretty straightforward, right? It implies our personal sins are the reason we're mortal. But that creates a huge problem. I mean, think about it. Babies are mortal before they can ever commit a sin. So what's really going on here? Well, the clue, the smoking gun really, is in the original Greek. The phrase that gets translated as because is ep ho. And this right here, folks, is where the historical error was made. Because ep ho does not mean because. So what does it mean? What does it mean? Ep ho actually means on which or upon which. It doesn't describe a cause, it describes a condition that leads to a consequence. Okay, think of it like this. I walked into a stumbling block on which I fell. My fall didn't cause the stumbling block to exist, right? No, the stumbling block was the condition, the situation that resulted in my fall. So when we put the correct translation back into the verse, it reads completely differently. It says, death spread to all men on which all sinned. Whoa, that changes everything. It's not that we die because we sin, it's that we sin because we are dying, because we exist in this state of mortality. So the sequence is actually this. Adam's sin happened. The result was that death, mortality, spread to all of humanity. And it's in this new mortal condition on which that we all inevitably sin. See? Mortality is the condition that leads to our sinning, not the other way around. So how did this one little mistake become official doctrine? Well, it all started around 480. A famous scholar named Jerome was creating the Latin Vulgate, which was a massive new translation of the Bible. He translated if-ho as because. And then, not long after, one of the most influential theologians in all of history, Augustine, took that translation and built his entire doctrine of original sin right on top of it. And since the Vulgate was the Bible in Europe for more than 1,000 years, that idea got cemented into Western Christianity. So, the crucial takeaway here is this distinction between two totally different ideas about sin. Is sin infused into our very being, like a poison in our soul, or is it imputed to our legal account, like a charge on a record? Let's just break these two views down side by side. On one hand, you have the infused view. It says sin is poured into us, giving us a corrupt nature. So salvation has to be about Christ's righteousness being poured back in to make us perfect. The focus naturally lands on our works, trying to achieve that perfection, which, you guessed it, often leads to guilt. But then you have the imputed view. It says Adam's sin was legally credited to us, and the result was mortality. Salvation, then, is Christ's righteousness being legally credited to our account.
the whole focus shifts to faith in what God has declared, and that leads to peace and freedom. And you can see how that infused view creates such a terrible burden. If you believe you have to become perfect inside to be saved, you're basically trapped in an endless cycle of striving and failing. It leads to a faith that's driven by guilt, not grace. And that feeling of hopelessness is what historically even led to ideas like purgatory, this place you go to get perfected after you die, because it just feels impossible to get it done in this life. So, what exactly is this word imputation? Just think of it like a legal term, something that would happen in a courtroom. It's about changing a legal status, not a physical substance. When Adam's sin was imputed to us, we weren't filled with some sin goo, but our legal standing changed, and the consequence of that was mortality. It's all about what's on our legal record before God. Look, this is so much more than a dusty old theology debate. It has a massive effect on our daily lives. Understanding that our righteousness is also imputed, that it's legally declared, is the absolute key to finding that peace that so often feels just out of our grasp. And this right here is the liberating truth. Your righteousness in God's eyes is not based on your performance. It's not based on your feelings of perfection. It is based on a legal declaration made by God Himself because of your faith in Christ. In God's courtroom, the verdict is in. You have been declared righteous. Case closed. But let's be real. What about when we still sin? The Bible is not naive about this. It tells us that as mortal beings, we're going to mess up. But our legal standing as righteous is never revoked. Instead, we have a clear path. We confess it. God is faithful to forgive, cleansing us within that secure relationship, not as some kind of condition for getting back in. So, we'll just leave you with this to think about. How does it change things for you to know that your standing with God is a settled legal fact and not a daily performance review? How does that shift your perspective on your struggles, on your guilt, and on your freedom in a life of faith?